Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cryptid Chronicles. This is your host, Ryan Edwards. First off, I want to say sorry about last week, everyone. I know we missed a episode. I was trying to plan one out, but just scheduling, difficulties, and things like that. Everyone understands how it can be, hopefully. So I want to bring this week. This week will be a little bit special for you guys. I have a researcher from here in Texas, Daniel Allen Jones. He's one guy I've really looked up to because I've met him a couple of times at conferences here in Texas. His information within not just cryptozoology but old 4chan research is great. So he's the host of the Vortex podcast. He has done years and years of research. He's someone that's well known in the field here in Texas. Hopefully, try to get well known across the country. So I want to welcome on Daniel Allen Jones, and I'm on the show. Good night.
Hey, Ryan. Appreciate
Hey,
that
Daniel.
introduction. It's great to be here with you, and I'm glad to see you're doing this new show. It's awesome. So thanks. I'm glad to be here with you.
Of course. That's one thing I've always wanted to do, and I love talking to researchers and things like that. And I know sometimes when you got information, it's hard to get that information out there. So I'm hoping, like you doing YouTube and other like podcast ideas, to get that information out there and get people on here that really deserve some attention in this field.
Yeah, I think that that's something that people all across the world can really gain access to is just the things that are available for free, on YouTube. Whereas, not a lot of people can always make the conferences and events, or much less get out to do field research or find out about cases or, interesting legends and mysteries in their area. So I think that you're doing an awesome job of helping to provide for that as well. I've been at it for a little while to try to do something similar and see what we can do to basically work together to make sense of some of these challenging issues that are right here in our own backyard, so to speak. I've been a lifelong Texan, and as you know, there are many different strange encounters right here in the area. And I think that that's something that obviously caught my attention because you hear about a lot of these pretty fantastic stories, all around the world, and it makes you wonder about all of those things. But one of the cool things I think for anyone that is interested in this type of stuff is see what's in your own area and use that. And I think is it serves as a good base of operations to try to start from there in your regional, local area, branch out, maybe connect with other people as we've done, and see what's going on with the current research and maybe the historical perspective, and see who else is out there who's still alive, if there are any, things like witnesses, if there was something seen. And I think, it's a good way to connect the dots and data points together. And if you can, it's, if not anything else, a fun experience. It's a good adventure. But if people are trying to make sense of it, collect it for presentable research, like what we have going on here with the Cryptid Chronicles, it gives people an opportunity to find out about it that otherwise may never know about some of these interesting cases. So I think it's great to see that you can kind of get these people together, get your work and research together in a cohesive form, share it online with the rest of the world. So that's awesome.
Yes, like there's so many times I've heard from like other researchers and podcasters. They talk to hundreds and hundreds of eyewitnesses, and there's like weird little correlations. Like for instance, there might be a bunch of like Sasquatch sightings in this time of year in this particular area, and if you don't have researchers like doing these podcasts and out there doing this research, these correlations people will never find. And there's helps with a data set and just collecting more data for this field because you truly need those eyewitness accounts, those sightings, all that stuff, and try to make sense of it. And hopefully, with doing stuff like this, we can help that. And with deeper research, people don't realize a lot of times there's a lot of weird stuff around you. Like here in Texas, like if you just think of Texas, you don't think like okay, cryptids, okay, maybe they have Bigfoot or chupacabra. Then you look into it, you're like okay, there's thunderbird sightings here. There are black cat sightings here. There are lake monster sightings here, and you see this history. And with you, like how what really got you into this field? Because this is kind of a very niche field. I always tell people, and honestly, sometimes the story to get that got you into the field is even more fantastical than the field itself.
Right, I think so. And while there are a lot of people who do claim to have some extraordinary encounter or something of some sort, I don't. I don't really claim to have seen any strange creatures or anything, at least that I can recall. Because a lot of people, because of those types of experiences, are inadvertently brought into this area of research, and it makes us wonder how often people don't ever share about some of the things they saw that otherwise could be very helpful. So for myself, I don't ever recall having anything like a Bigfoot sighting or seeing a strange creature. I've seen some interesting things out in the outdoors and in nature. I appreciate all kinds of different things here in Texas and beyond, but I consider myself a nature and wildlife enthusiast. I do what I can to have a bit of my hand at like amateur wildlife photography and just having fun getting around and seeing different places, environments. Because as you know, Texas is a really huge state, a lot of geographical variety, and so what we have, I think, is a really great place right here to host a number of different types of creatures of all sorts. So I think that for myself, what really caught my attention, of course, growing up and knowing about all types of different mysteries through mainly pop culture and media, through games and shows and things, because it was so normalized. I think that it just was a part of my upbringing. But it wasn't until, I would say, when I was in high school that, and this is early 2000s, that I was really interested in cryptozoology, like finding out about this strange field of research called cryptozoology, this study of unknown or hidden animals that are potentially out there that exist. And so I kind of went down a bit of a deep dive into these mystery creatures, and I didn't really do much more other than maybe read a few things online. I didn't have any books or know anyone at that time beyond just maybe hearing a few things here and there, and knowing that there was that one video of that one creature like walking, and it just kind of caught my attention. I didn't really have much of a working basis of knowledge beyond that. And it wasn't until about 2009, 2010 that I got really curious about some of the local things in my area. I was going through a lot of personal changes in my own outlook and experiences in life, and that led me to seeing what was available in my area to actually, as far as local people or groups that I could go and connect with to, get together with like-minded individuals that might have something that they could share about as far as like some of these strange mysteries and anything. So I ended up getting involved with a group at the time, which was called EPIC. EPIC was an acronym for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council. Sounds like a really cool type of group, so that obviously caught my attention. And the main reason why I ended up getting to be involved with this group was because of a guy named Jim Mars, and he wrote a number of different books on several like very controversial subjects, some pretty conspiratorial, but he was also involved and interested in a lot of things. So while I got interested in that through some of his other work, I found out after the fact that he had been involved with a ton of things, and he was a big inspiration for me to do the work that I do now with like my reportive work, investigative journalism with the Vortex and things like that, and my media work. So Jim really did a lot to, I think, encourage me through his integrity as an investigative journalist, because he just tried to cover the facts and he didn't sensationalize things. And so I really liked that style of reporting. But the group that we were involved with looked to do all types of extraordinary phenomena, as the name suggests, which included cryptozoology and these mystery creatures or strange animals and things. So because of this group, I eventually, that same and following year, so 2010, 2011, I ended up getting to meet a few guys who you now know as, are kind of regulars in a lot of these events as well. You've got people like Craig Woolheater, who's the host of the Texas Bigfoot Conference, Lyle Blackburn, who's the author of The Beast of Boggy Creek, probably the biggest proponent of Falk, Arkansas's The Legend of Boggy Creek, and so others like my good friends Ken Gerhard and Nick Redfern, just a lot of people I got to meet and work with through this group. So it was something that really was an awesome experience in networking and touching base with other people, that I found out, oh, these guys are right here in my area. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and so we all got to connect and do these regular meetings, and that was really a great experience for me to find, wow, there's some incredible people and work being done right here. So that was really inspirational as well, and because of that, I found out about a number of things that I don't think I would have otherwise. And just as an example, I found out that my buddy who I mentioned, Jim Mars, who Rest in peace. He passed away. It's been 5 years ago now, but he was also the author of the original articles in the Fort Worth Star Telegram about the Lake Worth monster. So well before he was well known for authoring his best-selling books, he was like looking into these local legends and monsters right here in the area. And I thought that that was so cool because he was interested in Bigfoot. He was interested in monsters and creatures and all of this stuff. So that was really influential to me at the time. So I think that, and it still is really, so I think that it's great to see that he had an involvement in the area. And I'm just doing what I can, the minimal contribution that I can make, into helping to, further our understanding of some of these issues by doing investigative work, doing interviews and on location field investigations, helping with the community involvement with events, and of course the media that I do as well. I try to produce some simple video productions that people can watch for free on the Vortex on YouTube. So I am glad to see that this area of cryptozoology is, I think, drastically expanded in the last decade, at least since I've been involved with it, in such a way that a lot more people are on board. They're trying to figure this stuff out too. And while that might present a challenge in some ways, I think it's great to be able to have more people interacting in the community. Online, obviously, that's going to be a prominent issue, but also really getting out there and trying to explore. If not anything else, you've got more boots on the ground in the field, trying to make sense of what's going on out there, because people are describing these mysterious encounters. I don't know what people are really seeing. I don't claim to have ever seen any of these strange creatures, but I do think people are seeing something. It is compelling enough that I think you could build a strong case for there being the existence of some type of bipedal mystery animal and a creature. And then you have all these different theories and ideas people speculate on and maybe hypothesize that we could be dealing with something that isn't really seeming to be natural or normal at all, maybe even in the realm of paranormal, supernatural, or metaphysical. I'm not a strong proponent of these ideas, although I am open to entertaining them and seeing what we can figure out, because I don't know that it helps to explain one mystery with another, but I am definitely interested in all the different theories and ideas and mysteries that are out there. So I hear a lot of different things. I've read into a lot of things. I've collected a massive amount of literature on these topics, and I continue to do so because it's fascinating to me. And I just do what I can to really be a sponge and to absorb as much of the information and knowledge as I am able to, but not necessarily believe everything that I hear. Because I think, and as you know, there are a lot of little, like, very wild stories out there, and we have to do what we can to use our discernment and make sense of these issues in a grounded way, and not sensationalize things, and really just do what we can to make sense of otherwise very difficult claims. And so I think that's what it comes down to, really, is that you find yourself in a situation where people want to be able to share experiences, and you become somewhat of a therapist almost, that you're consoling people to share that when they ask, does this sound crazy? Am I crazy? And you're like, well, no, because other people are sharing something very similar. It might not be exactly what they're saying, but yeah, people, these experiences, they turn to and look to other people to make sense of. And sometimes even friends and family are maybe disregarding or dismissive, which I think is unfortunate, but it also is a very realistic factor that plays into the challenges presented to us by the people who claim to have these mystery encounters. So I think that with the work that you, Ryan, are doing, other people and many different groups and organizations that are available throughout, the world, really, and have been here for a long time, many years, we have more opportunities than ever, I think, for people to submit reports and sightings and do what they can to talk with other people and feel a sense of reassurance that they're not alone in this, they're not crazy, and that there are things out there that we can still discover. So I'm encouraged by that notion that we can go out and make new discoveries every day. And as I say on all my videos on the Vortex, we won't know if we don't go. And so we're trying to do that. We're trying to figure it out. Admittedly, I don't have any kind of credentialed scientific background, but I consider myself an amateur anthropologist, and an archaeology enthusiast, wildlife enthusiast. So I do what I can with the working knowledge that I have, that I've accumulated, not just through, being well read in this subject, but studying in some way at a formal academic level, and some of these issues as well. I've studied anthropology and archaeology. I'd like to see about pursuing something very seriously, but with the work that I do and what I am involved with in the many different aspects of my life, it can be difficult to get that in. But I am interested in that, and I think it helps to continue to not just pursue it, but push the boundaries of I think what helps to legitimize a lot of this research, because I think it's important that people in the mainstream or just in everyday life don't just see this as some kind of weird, fun hobby that's just, I mean, it can be for some, for sure, but I think that it can be a very legitimate field of science that we need to incorporate into wildlife biology and zoology. And in some sense, not just relegated to science fiction and pop culture, which it always has been and probably will still be, and maybe it should, because I think it helps to encourage new generations, new people. But I think that without rambling on too long, I just wanted to make a point to share that this has been a big influence on me since I was little, and I think that because of the serious approach that I've had for a little over a decade now, it's been something that I think I've had more questions that I've come across than I started out with at this point. And I'm glad to see that you, Ryan, are involved with this work as well, and that many others who are willing to come forward can help provide different perspectives. And I think that's great.
Yeah, like with the different perspectives, it's one thing I love seeing, especially in this field, is you have a spectrum almost of different perspectives in this big cryptozoology. You have like what earlier which reference, you have the people that believe these creatures might be from paranormal origins, others that see this through a more of a zoological, ecological perspective. You have people in the middle that see both sides. And you have that spectrum, and it's great to see that because you don't want everyone to just see it from one side. And then that's not really true research. That's pretty much almost ego taking over and saying, "Oh wait, no, it's my perspective only." And with it as well, it's good to see different perspectives, but it's also good to see people that might be more academically more credentials behind there because I believe that adds also a little bit more credibility to this field. Because if you say, "Well, I'm a Sasquatch researcher," someone will say, "Oh, so you hunt Bigfoot?" It's like, well, no, it's cryptozoology. It has ology in the name. It's a science, even though people perceive it as a pseudoscience. It still has a lot of research behind it. And when people say, "Well, it's just like monster hunting," or "You're just looking for animals in the woods," it kind of illegitimizes it. And that's one thing I try to bring on to the field nowadays is try to legitimize this research because the people like you and I that have done this for quite a while now, when people say, "Well, you're not gonna find anything, Bigfoot isn't real," or "Oh, you're just monster hunters in the woods," it really delegitimizes a lot of work we've done. Because when you go out there and you talk to eyewitnesses, when you go out there into the field, you see that there is meat behind this. There is a phenomenon occurring. There is something occurring. Now let's do the research into that. Just because something is unknown doesn't mean it shouldn't be researched. That's almost the opposite of science. Like science is if something's unknown, you don't know what it is, it's not recorded and measured. You go out there and try to record and measure it. You find that data. But with something like Sasquatch or with just general cryptozoology, because it's been so sensationalized and so put into pop culture, people don't want to go out there and do the research because they realize, well, it's probably gonna be I'm probably gonna get laughed at after this. Or when you say, "Oh, I hunt for Bigfoot," people want to take away 100 IQ points automatically and just say you're crazy. So kind of with this a lot of new researchers and kind of the new generation going into the field, it really helps out that we have different perspective, and also you keep that more scientifically minded side in there. It's not just a bunch of people in the woods hunt for Bigfoot with guns. It's something like that. It's true academic research, true data sets. So that's one thing I love, especially with you talking to you a couple times, Daniel. Like you have that very analytical, very scientifically minded perspective in this field, and that's one thing I love seeing in the field nowadays because I believe that's one way it's going to help legitimize cryptozoology. Because one thing I like to bring up with a lot of people is like, okay, what does cryptozoology turn into zoology? Like if we discovered Bigfoot, who would be doing research? The cryptozoologists that have been doing it for decades, or the people that have the doctorates and degrees that are the actual primatologists? Who would do that? When does a cryptid become just a regular animal? After discovery, or will people always take it as well? It's still a monster in the woods. And that's kind of the questions I try to bring about with people. And I always try to bring about with even the guests. Like, let's just say if we were to discover like with Sasquatch or something like that, where would be like the next steps from there? And like, with you, in your opinion, what would you believe if like Sasquatch was discovered tomorrow? What would be like steps taken? Maybe let's just take for instance here in Texas. What do you think we like certain steps taken right there?
Yeah, I think it's a really good and important question to ask, and it's one that I've been asking, for a while, and I think that it's a um, very loose and open-ended answer because I don't know that there's any one specific thing because people are very opinionated about this situation, about what should be done in the event that something um, a detection is made and a potential declaration can be made thereafter. And I think that what's really cool is I remember I think the time that we first met was at the Texas Bigfoot Conference, and you had a Gigantopithecus replica skull that you were having Dr. Jeff Meldrum sign. I thought that was really cool because I was right there while that was happening. And at the same event, I later on had a discussion with Meldrum about this same very issue. I asked him, in the event that we make the discovery, and I'm fascinated with this, not just with the potential of something like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but any of the other potential cryptids or mystery encounters out there of all sorts. So I think that when we're dealing with the process of discovery, there are a lot of things that most people, general science enthusiasts, don't even understand. Is that there's a great process at play with what goes on from the step of detection or discovery to the declaration of that discovery. It's not instantaneous. It doesn't happen in such a way that as soon as someone finds something, that it's just all over the news and media. Sometimes it might seem that way, but really, what happens is that you have all these different things going on in the field with whoever's there, whether it's scientific teams, or it's an individual, or it's just citizens and just regular civilians just doing whatever, and they happen upon something. Typically, what will occur is, let's say, even if scientific work is being done, you can make a discovery. However, you come about that discovery, let's just say you get to that point. Now, the way that has to be reviewed, if it's not just peer reviewed, but it's like made sense in some way that, okay, this definitely seems to be of interest enough to consider further analyzation and all of this stuff. You could therefore put it into context for media personnel to then spin it off and sensationalize it however they're going to do. So in the event of Bigfoot becoming discovered, it would have to be something that would be very substantial and not ambiguous at all. And here's why: because these claims are made every day. Like, people say, "Oh yeah, I've seen them. I've got them. I've got some on my property." They're everywhere. They have habituation sites. They have these structures. You can hear them vocalize. They're leaving trace evidence of DNA through hair, blood, scat, trackways, whatever it is, right? All of these things are very commonplace in this field. The challenge is that I think that until this becomes very definitive by a very much like all across the board way of acceptance scientifically, and we say, okay, this is for sure real. There's definitely some kind of bipedal creature out there that is near human. When we can acknowledge that and go beyond and say we've done the testing, it's a new species. It's not Homo sapien. It's not quite like Neanderthal, or it's not exactly all material science at all. There could be some other element to it, and that would be an incredible discovery. But at the same time, until we get to that point, it's not until that all can usually be verified, or at least acknowledged that it is being studied, and maybe even behind closed doors, that something can be declared about it. And what I mean by that is the public can know, because it's being put out through media outlets, through scientific journals, through whatever sources that are going to share that news. And so that's why it's important to see that sometimes peer-reviewed work takes time. It's not just instantaneous. And although some things come out very quick, there are usually later on retractions or even redactions and things that are saying, look, well, we thought it might be promising at first, but we soon realized like it's not as wild as we thought. And I think that there are some good examples of this, but I'll just say with Bigfoot and with the idea of cryptozoology, I used to look at this in many different ways, and I always thought it was very fascinating. But now I feel like I'm a proponent that most cryptozoology is, if not anything else, a subset of zoology, and it has to be. I think it has to be seen that way. I think that if anyone comes across any of these mystery creatures, that it would do a disservice to any of the legitimate scientists, the again wildlife biologists, zoologists, the biological paleontologists, those that are actually making great strides to do this work already, at an academic or scientific level. They're the ones who should foremost have the privilege and opportunity to study and examine, catalog, and really bring into the social standard of awareness a new declaration of existence alongside those who have made the effort to showcase that it's been a study all along. So it's not to say throw everyone under the bus and just say, hey, these guys are now part of the show. But I think that that's really what we're dealing with, is that we have to be inclusive when it comes to a scientific discipline. I think stratifying it is always going to be part of the challenge, because different camps, different groups, organizations, institutions are all contending for resources through funding and all of this stuff, grants, even in the medical industry, and it's like that. So government's a lot like that too. But one of the things that I think people consider in this field that would be unsettling is that, because there might be some sort of cover up or something as to why we haven't already said it, that Bigfoot exists as something, is because it would undo the logging industry. It would do so much to deforestation, and all of this stuff that we can't afford for that to happen. It's like, well, I think that there are some strong influences there affecting that outlook. But ultimately, to me, and in my view, I think that it's really important that the people who are already doing the serious work on the end of just really mapping a lot of the genetics and species and subspecies and all of these different things that we can see, ought to have the opportunity to include that in their work, because that's what's going to, again, be what is going to be peer reviewed and looked at in a serious way, that's going to eventually be shared around by scientific journals, and then subsequently news articles, media, all that sort of stuff, and set a new standard of awareness. So I'm really interested in this, in the anthropology, and the sense of cultural awareness about these topics, because you have essentially you have ideas of cultures in different areas in the world who already have knowledge of their environment and the creatures therein. This is ethnozoology. And so people in the field of cryptozoology often rely heavily upon ethnozoological information and data from natives of particular cultures and areas in an attempt to verify the claims that are made about mystery creatures or creatures not yet known to Western science. And I think that's really where we're at, is that it could be that some of these creatures are or have been known at some point by various peoples in different cultures, and that now we're just trying to catalog them scientifically, again, to set a new standard of awareness in society. I think that's what it comes down to, is the process of discovery into declaration, into societal awareness. It's an anthropological cultural shift in awareness. And I think that's really where I think my interest lies, is as interested as I am in the phenomenon, or again, the many different types of phenomena, as we were talking about. I'm interested in the culture aspect as well, the people who were involved with this in those various communities, not just with cryptozoology, but with other areas of alternative communities as well, looking into other strange subjects and all of this. So I think there's a lot of crossover, and I think that it is important to see that science is not really just happening instantaneously, like it's just suddenly out in the world. You can live stream an event and maybe it can reach people, but if it's peer reviewed and it gets to a point to where it's like, widely accepted and there's consensus behind ideas, it would be great to potentially see within our lifetimes that they can say, okay, yes, there is strong indication, and not even that, definitive proof that animal X exists, or creature whatever exists, and that we can say for sure it's real, it's here, maybe here it is, and then people can say, oh, okay, there it is, I'm fine with that, it exists now, it's not a mystery anymore. And that's going to be a challenge for all the pop culture baggage, which people want it to remain in this mysterious, elusive type of situation, because the mystery is what is appealing. Once that is demystified and all of this idea basically becomes disenchanted, it will become difficult for a lot of people to hang on to certain ideas that otherwise have been dismantled. And I think that's a step forward in some ways, but it's also a step back in some people's view. So there's a lot to it. I'm really glad that you're bringing this up and that you're also curious about this, asking people these types of things. And the response I got from Meldrum was very similar in that he just says that it's really important that we see that we've always been interested in what he said was near humans, and this idea that once we discover it, I think it's important to see that you will have anthropologists get involved in ways that will allow them to study closely, as close as they can, hopefully to a live setting, and really understand the aspects of what we're dealing with wildlife biologists, and learning a very cutting edge, innovative form of science. So that's exciting to me. I hope to be able to see it happen. And if not anything else, share about it, because that's what I like to do as well, is to share about the information out there. If obviously I can't get, to be involved in a very literal way, I'll do what I can to showcase that, there's some great work being done by all kinds of different groups and individuals. And I think it's important that we can at least acknowledge that. So that's my thought on it.
Of course. And like that's one perspective I really do like because not a lot of people realize they always think cryptozoology, they think zoology, paleontology, but they don't really think anthropology because a lot of these cryptids seen especially around the world internationally have been talked about in the cultural zeitgeist for centuries. Like for instance, everyone brings up of course Sasquatch because it's in almost every native culture, but look at even the Yeti of the Himalayas. The Nepalese people have been talking about a large human-like creature, or just a large, hairy, unknown creature in the Himalayas for centuries. And even parts of in Africa, you have stories of like Moki and Mbembe and the living dinosaurs there. They've been in the cultural zeitgeist for centuries as well. And of course, a lot of these like anthropologists and researchers they believe, well, these are just native stories that are just maybe talking about maybe some type of deity or some type of like monster, like how ancient Greeks would talk about minotaurs and centaurs. But then again, you find a reality within these stories. Like for instance, in Africa, they would talk about man stealing half humans that would live in the woods. And soon enough, when we found out about gorillas, we discovered the gorillas are what they're talking about. And even when people were talking about it was in Eastern Africa. They were talking about the lion killers, giant chimpanzee gorilla mixes, and then we discovered the billy ape. Of course, the billy ape is not some type of gorilla chimpanzee mix, but it's a reference to what they are talking about. There is a truth in every legend, and especially with anthropology, you can find out these legends and see, okay, there is a little bit of truth. We just have to find it. And of course, with like discovery of like cryptid or even just cryptozoology itself, culture people know about cryptozoology, but not a lot of people know, it, especially by name. People might be like, "Oh, I know that one TV show. Or I know this one TV show. Or, oh, I know that one monster," and you have to change it from almost like a that pop culture into a science. Like, okay, yes, the Loch Ness monster is we have signs of this. You see it as a monster. It's in the name, but what else could it be? With Sasquatch, people say like, "Oh, it's just some giant human ape creature monster that lives in the woods." It's like, no, there's more to it. You have to change that paradigm. And that's like one thing I love with cryptozoology. It is a big changing of paradigm. There's a lot of people I know that got into this field and their eyes open up to a lot more things. They realize this world is a lot stranger than we first realized it. And especially with you, I was wondering, with yourself, are there a lot any like particular cases or maybe creatures or phenomena you would really kind of hone in on to, or you've done investigation in yourself?
Yeah, I'm interested in a lot of these mystery encounters that are described. Obviously, the Bigfoot phenomenon is a big one, and I think that there could be something to it. I would say I find that there's a compelling case. I don't know that I would claim that I believe or that I'm totally convinced because I have to remain open and skeptical, or at least objective, not dismissing or disregarding. But I think that it's important because to me, this is as Cliff Barackman, who was one of the hosts on Finding Bigfoot, a TV show similar to like what you're mentioning, who is now also the curator of the North American Bigfoot Center. up there in Boring, Oregon. I think it's really important to see that he's made some good points about how the show that he was a part of really helps to spread awareness, even if it's pop culture or even if it's just entertainment. That it brings sort of that elevation of awareness in society up to a level that at least people are acknowledging that there could be something out there and there's still room for discovery. So I think that he makes a good point in saying that Bigfoot is a matter of biology. Um, I don't know that it's a matter of belief. I don't think it really will affect our outlook if we say that we believe in this creature that's potentially out there or we don't believe it. I don't think that'll negate its existence. I mean, if it's out there, then it's out there. If it's not, it's not. We can't believe. I don't know. Maybe we can, but I'm not too keen on the notion that like just because we want to believe that something's there, we'll always make it so. And as fanciful as that sounds to some people, I think that I have just for myself, I have to take that objective approach, especially because I hear a lot of different people's encounter stories and thoughts on this whole issue, and I have to think that while I don't necessarily maybe agree with all of them or believe all of them, that I have to at least be accepting that maybe there is something to it. And so for my own sense of like trying to discern what is real or what isn't real, because obviously there are a lot of made up stories that are totally bogus. Unfortunately, that does a disservice to the people who are trying to do well-meaning work with all of this. You have to try to make sense of it the best we can with the tools that we have. And so I would say that for my own sense of trying to navigate this mysterious area of cryptozoology, I'm fascinated with Bigfoot. Obviously, in Texas, we have places all over in the forests of East Texas, Sam Houston National Forest, the Piney Woods, getting into Caddo. These areas, I think, have been, part of a almost a sense of folklore that has these stories embedded of the wild man, places that really seem to be indicative that people were seeing something for a long time here in the South, which is generally not really a very well-known thing in modern sense of like what people generally think of for Sasquatch. They just think Pacific Northwest. So I've been to a lot of these locations out here, and again, while I've personally never seen anything myself, I hear people that say I've seen them. I had a sighting back in whenever, or some people even claim to have multiple sightings. I'm just doing what I can to sort of connect those dots, but maybe go and retrace the steps, go back to some of these places. So I've had the opportunity to travel some of these places, obviously with, I think, the biggest popularizer of Fouke, Arkansas. At this point, my good friend Lyle Blackburn has done a great job of sharing that folklore, that cultural, tradition and history, and this, chronology of events that took place around this area of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. This strange kind of concentration of activity in this area shows that I think there could be very well, could be something to this mystery down here in the South, that we could be dealing with some type of feral biped, whatever that is. I don't know. It could be people. It could be Homo sapiens that are, a tangent off in some way genetically. I don't know that it could be much different. Some people think until we get something, I think we have to have a type specimen to make those determinations. Otherwise, it's all wild speculation. But I am interested in those places. I've been around. Fouke, Arkansas is like, it has all of these different fun Bigfoot things. Now it's got the Monster Mart, and you have all this stuff. Even in Southeast Oklahoma, in Hochatown, it's like everywhere you go, there's Bigfoot signs. There's just stuff all over shops, and so it's like a cultural phenomenon. It's something that they openly acknowledge and celebrate. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how that works. And I was also fortunate enough to go to into the Pacific Northwest last summer and explore the Patterson-Gimlin film site. I've been fortunate to talk with and to interview Bob Gimlin a number of times. Bob Gimlin was one of two people who was part of the experience or encounter that was captured in what we call the Patterson-Gimlin film, as you and many people who are watching probably know. And if you don't know it by the name, you'll know it by that silhouette of that frame of that creature looking over, its shoulder. We call it frame 352 of the Patterson-Gimlin film because Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin were out at Bluff Creek in California and in October of 1967, and it's been over half a century now when this happened. And there's still controversy about this issue all this time later. Is that were they really there in October? Was it really a real creature? Was it Was it someone in a suit? All these questions still fester, and people are generally curious because they think how how often and widespread that iconic silhouette that has been plastered all over everything. You see that, and it's a universal icon. That's Bigfoot. That's Sasquatch, and it's one of those things where people see it and they immediately know what it is, but kind of is relegated to that's just one of those silly. It's like a meme now. It's just kind of one of those silly jokes, right? But I think some people say, wow, it's like there could be something to it. So I like to go and trace the steps and get into these areas that I think could very well host something like this. It's very remote. And I think that while Bigfoot's a big one, there are other mystery animals as well. And while we were there, I was with an expedition crew and team consisting of a number of other individuals, namely Ken Gerhard, Jim Whitehead, Jason Kotz, and Jamie Wayne. We connected with what's called the Bluff Creek Project while we were there. But our primary objective while we were in the Pacific Northwest was to look into this place called the Trinity Shasta Park, or the river, Trinity River, and this place called Klamath, and to scour the waterways and the creeks and any of these different places like this, way out in the middle of nowhere, to look for these alleged giant salamanders, which is really interesting. There's this cryptid salamander, this giant salamander that's not just a foot, 2 feet big. It's supposedly 4 to 8 feet long, and this is enormous. Obviously, we know that there are giant salamanders that do exist in China and Japan, and from the claims that are out there, from who I've heard from individual sources who have no relation to our investigation and our expedition, there could be something to that. And so we got to go out there, and while we didn't see any 4 to 8 foot long salamanders, we went to the original sites of the investigations done by Tom Slick and other people since the 60s. And we probably have done the most modern and advanced work in these areas since any of that had happened. So I got to document that process, and I'm also now in the process of releasing that as a documentary. So I think that we're really happy and looking forward to being able to share that. So I think there could be something out there. And while we didn't see any giant ones, we did find what are actually called Pacific giant salamanders. And so the Pacific North giant salamanders end up getting from a few inches long to maybe a foot long or so, and they're aquatic in their adolescent stage, and when they become matured, they become terrestrial, and they go out of the water and they go up on land, and they'll hide under rocks and logs and stuff like this. So we found a good sized salamander that was underwater, and at least we found something. I think that's incredible, considering almost every Bigfoot show documentary out there never captures anything. It's always like, it was just around the corner, we almost got it, and of course, that's kind of to be expected to keep the show, dramatized and sensationalized. But we actually did capture a salamander, a living specimen. It wasn't what we were, looking for, but it was something of a species that we were kind of hoping to find. So at least we had that. Aside from the salamanders, and which is a really cool one to me, as you mentioned earlier, here in Texas, we have all these stories of cryptid cats, felids. You have canids. The whole idea of the chupacabra, the El Chupacabras, which was the original Puerto Rican one, which is much different than the Texas blue dog, which is essentially canid. It's like a coyote with mange, which is not a mystery animal. It's a known species with a condition. This is something that we have happen regularly. We just had one appear in the DFW area maybe like a month ago. And when people see something they don't understand, like an animal, that's automatically a chupacabra for most people. It's just kind of this thing we use. But that's something I've looked into quite a bit as well. I'm interested in the avian cryptids and the aquatic cryptids as well. Down in South Texas, they had sightings of something they call the big bird, which Ken Gerhard authored his first book on. And so that was something that when I go down there about once a year for an event, and I would always have people tell me, yeah, I was there. I had family and friends that were there during that time in 1976 in Raymondville, Brownsville, and all these places that people saw this giant, disproportionately large flying creature. And so it's really interesting because some people describe it almost being like a pterosaur or a pteranodon, or in other words, a pterodactyl, which doesn't make any sense in accordance with conventional paleontology and science, is that these things are supposed to have been extinct for millions of years. But here they are. Apparently, people are seeing something with the morphology that they would describe seems to be indicative of these animals. And I think that's curious, if not anything else, that maybe there are some strange creatures out there that we haven't yet acknowledged that could very well fit the description, and be good candidates for something that's a relict dinosaur, or even a relict type of species that has survived a bygone era into the modern time frame. And so that's an exciting notion. So I think that there's something to that. Texas doesn't have a lot of other aquatic cryptids other than stories of like giant catfish and things. So there's this idea of this giant catfish over at Lake of the Pines. And I've been there a few times, and obviously I'm looking out into a lake, and you could only imagine when you're at any body of water like this, like what's going on under there. So maybe some people, in every town, every lake has their giant catfish story. So that's always interesting, but it's not an unknown animal really as much as it is like just a known species that's just larger than usual. Sometimes that falls into, I think, the animal science of these things, which I'm interested in as well. So outside of that, you have all these different ideas of, the different species. People talk about different types of other potential creatures as well. And there's a big element of anthropomorphic entities. And a good example of this is the supposed dog man, or what some people commonly refer to as the werewolf, and or a lycanthrope. And really, I don't know that anything like this really exists out there, but we just held the first ever Dogman conference in Paris, Tennessee, which was a huge success. It was a giant, well-attended event. It was great to have everyone come out and share some cultural perspective, some witness testimony, and new ideas regarding this Dogman phenomenon. And that sounds bizarre, but people really attest to there being this bipedal, canid person, for lack of better terms, that's just like very menacing, and seeming to be very aggressive sometimes, which is kind of scary. And it makes you wonder what's going on here. If a half of 1% of any of these claims have any legitimacy, I mean, we could be dealing with something that totally is unknown and unrecognized by science. So that's, I think, what gives us the best potential for new discoveries, because I think that if we just chalk up a lot of these to sensationalism or delusion or whatever, and I don't know that it really is, maybe for some, but these people are very sincere, and they describe a very real creature or animal or person type entity. And I think that's curious to me, because it makes us wonder, like, what's really going on? Is it something to the effect of a natural creature? Is it a modified, genetically augmented creature? What's going on with any of these cryptids, and so that's essentially what we refer to them as cryptids for, is because we don't know. They are mystery creatures, mystery animals that we haven't really acknowledged. But I think that because it helps for me to keep things in a grounded perspective, that I don't dismiss that there are some really bizarre entities, but I think that it's also a disservice to completely throw out the much more conventional notions of the more zoological side of these animals, because I think that some of them, and in some way, aren't paranormal or supernatural at all, and are just like normal creatures that we just haven't been able to really catalog yet. And that's exciting to me, because if we're only interested in the super fantastic ones, then I think that it's a little bit underwhelming to think that it's the other ones aren't as deserving to look into. So I'm interested in the aquatic, the avian, the mammalian, the reptilian, strange plants and strange insects as well. And I think that all of these different things help us to understand that that the world is full of these different animals, and people throughout many cultures have described things. And I think that it can be a lot of fun to look into. If not anything else, it's a great experience to go out and explore the wilderness areas of nature. Learn about wildlife, learn about animal behavior and science, learn about morphology, learn about track and sign, and do what we can. And as myself, as a citizen scientist, or at least doing what I can by way of citizen science to help contribute to a greater, more meaningful body of work outside of just cryptozoology. But again, wildlife biology and zoology as a greater whole of the field of operation, I think it's important that we acknowledge that this is not an isolated discipline. It's connective. And if we don't look into these, rudimentary areas first and disciplines first, it might be difficult for us to make sense of things if we're only, one dimensional into Bigfoot or something, because I think there's more to it. But I am open to these ideas that maybe there could be something else going on that we haven't really given much regard to in our material sciences. So, like I said, Bigfoot's a big one. I was glad to be able to go out to the Patterson-Gimlin site. All these great places in East Texas that are very forested. Visiting some of the cultural, places. These destinations are really interesting. And visiting some of these places, I've been out to like Death Valley in search of some remains and in caves and things, and in going to Washington, and just going to these different areas in Arkansas and in different states that I think could be suitable habitats for very remotely isolated pockets of individual creatures that really sustain a low volume population. Because I think that may be what it comes down to outside of a very endangered species, is that they're in small numbers and in pocketed groups, and are difficult to find for anybody. But I'm curious to hear what you think and maybe what some of your thoughts are on some of these. I share a lot of these as in my investigations through the media work that I do and the interviews and the field investigations on location segments, and a lot of the different conferences. We try to share with different speakers coming. I think it's a great way for people who can't make it out into the field to hear about some of the field work that's been done by a variety of field researchers and investigators, and people that are trying to publish work that they think is important. If it's not anything else, it's interesting folklore, it's interesting history, it's maybe interesting pop culture, but it gives us a perspective on the different mystery animals that are out there. And so I think that it's fun to encourage anyone to get out to some of these events that are available in those areas.
Yes, like, what it like? But I always tell people that have never gone to like a conference or an event, like, oh, try to, because that sharing information, just talking to someone that might have had a very similar experience as you have, or even just talking to researchers, it's a great experience. Because sharing information is very important in this field. And I do see very similar perspectives to mine to yours, because like with me, I kind of break it down like this. I'm in my mind, about 75 to 7% of cryptids are biological known species. Other than that, unknown origins. But I look at cryptozoology from very much a zoological, ecological, even paleontological perspective. Because, like with certain cryptids, like let's just say like the dogman, for instance, there is no real old history of this creature unless you talk about maybe like whale, like an octopus, before maybe the 1980s. And in my mind, I'm like, well, a species doesn't work like that. A species just doesn't come out of nowhere. And okay, let's just say if it was a real species, what's its evolutionary history? Why does it have the morphology that it has? Why does it have the behavior set it has? And that's why I look at a lot of these cryptids and say, well, a lot of these might not even exist in the first place. Or if they do exist, it's something we do not have an idea of. Maybe something non-physical, or some type of origin that is outside of ecology and biology. But like for instance, like with the Bigfoot phenomenon, there are many principles that these creatures have that are very biological, very primate behaviors that you see it occur in known species. And these comparison of unknown species and known species is very important because, like for instance, with the black the black cat phenomenon here in Texas and across the world, you have to look at okay, it's a black feline. What species is it? Is it maybe some type of unknown species? Is it a melanistic cougar? Is it a released species, released maybe panther or something like that? And you have to look at okay, what's the behavior set? Is it like a lot of people I've talked to? I've talked to eyewitnesses before that said they saw a large black cat, and I tell them, okay, describe the ears, and they say, well, it had pointed ears, and you have to make the observation. Well, pointed ears is something that's found in domestic cat morphology, not wild cat morphology. and just observers might not realize that. And with it, there are many sciences that do go into the hand of cryptozoology. Like I talk about for me myself, I go to a lot of like schools and talk about cryptozoology because I see it as a good kind of introduction to science itself. Because kids might see, well, it's monsters, so they're already interested in it, and then you have to bring up, well, it's data driven, it's collecting evidence. You have to be open minded, but yet not open minded to everything. You have to be open minded, but not take in false data that you clearly see as false. And there are many fields and perspectives. For instance, like anthropology, you have zoology, biology, paleontology, because a lot of these cryptids could be surviving species. Like with the Thunderbird ideas, you have these people that see living pterosaurs. And then once you do a lot of research into paleontology, you realize there are certain morphologies and these sightings that don't occur in actual paleontological uh, creatures. For instance, people talk about seeing a creature very similar to Quetzalcoatlus, a large, as dark as pterosaurs found here in Texas, but they describe it only being maybe a 20-foot to 10-foot wingspan, while the Asgardian pterosaurs had 40 to 50-foot wingspans, and you have to kind of question that. And there's just many perspectives and observations that you see that might correlate or might not even correlate to known species. And you have to wonder about that also, that sensational aspect of it. Because with these creatures, for instance, like Bigfoot and Dogman and Thunderbirds, they're very sensationalized. People know about them because not just because they're very well known, but also because you have something that's very human like, or you have something that's very scary, so people know about it more. But then you have cryptids that are seen out there, but people might not have heard about. Like, yeah, one example I love bringing up is the Mengai Seoka. If you've ever read On the Trail of Unknown Animals by Bernard Hooverman, he talks about an unknown donkey species found in Madagascar. People might not have even heard of it because they just see, oh, it's just an unknown horse, some type of unknown equid. So it doesn't get that sensational aspect to it. Or you have the Isnashi of South America, a giant spider monkey. Some people might be like, okay, it's just a giant spider monkey, it's just a giant species, okay, and they move on. But like I remember last year when King Gerhard, because he's also a friend of mine down here in South Texas, was talking about the giant salamander expedition, and it's something that didn't get a lot of, well, not just press coverage, but like a lot of really people looking at it because they just think, oh, just giant salamanders. Maybe doesn't deserve the attention that maybe Bigfoot hunt deserves. But with these giant species, it's still something very important to science and cryptozoology in general. Like for instance, you have the giant salamander sightings. You have people that see giant bears, giant eels, giant spiders, even. And these might not have the like press coverage I like to say in cryptozoology, but it's just as important as a Sasquatch or Dogman or Nessie, even these big names within cryptozoology. And that's why I find it very important to give attention not to just the big names of cryptozoology, but also the ones that are a little bit unknown. Because even one example I always love bringing up is the orang pendek. The orang pendek might not be as well known as Bigfoot. It's an unknown humanoid species seen in Sumatra, but it might have an even more likelihood of being discovered than Sasquatch. But yet, just because people have not heard of it, there's no research into it. You have to have that kind of that name recognition in order for people to really do the research. Like, well, for instance, with Sasquatch, if we didn't have, I like to think if we didn't have the name Bigfoot and Sasquatch, not a lot of people would really be looking into it because there's no name recognition into it, so there's no real research. And like even with like the chupacabra, like that's one joke I do love to tell people. If people see anything weird out in the Southwest, they always talk about, okay, it's a chupacabra, and it's like, well, no, like King Gerhard says it himself, chupacabra describes a behavior, not a creature. The goat sucker is describing some type of vampiric creature. The descriptions might vary, but it's just the same behavior set. So when people say chupacabra, they just pretty much mean any unknown species, but people might correlate it to like the Texas blue dog, like down in Cuero and Elmendorf, the one found on Phyllis County's property, some type of unknown canine. And then you have like in Puerto Rico, some type of almost extraterrestrial or primate reptilian looking creature. And it's kind of just funny how that name recognition occurs many times with cryptozoology.
Yeah, I think that does play a big role in our recognition, and again, that kind of falls into that cultural baggage that it seems to, be something that catches attention and really helps us to understand, some kind of significance that we place upon the idea more than the actual specimens, entities, creatures, whatever they are. And a good example, and I think you make a good point because it's something that doesn't get a lot of recognition. The salamander story is obviously lesser known; they're not as fantastic as a Sasquatch, but they were actually like included in the same areas of these researchers in the 50s and 60s, and after this as well, of saying, yeah, we're out here, we're looking into the Pacific Northwest sightings, and we're seeing things, we're trying to follow up and in these places, and oh, by the way, we see that there are these giant salamanders. It was almost like an afterthought, that was just an inclusion in the Bigfoot stories, and so it obviously doesn't garner the interest of something a little bit more fantastic. But you're right. I think that the sensationalism does play a part to really suggest that people are more entertained at these ideas that are more incredible or sort of beyond the scope of what is normal than just something a little bit more conventional. And another example of this is the Mothman. And of course, Mothman is very nondescriptive outside of conjuring ideas of a bug-like entity, which it was never described as such, And so the thing is that the name ends up having this cultural baggage or pop culture notion that really insinuates more than the actual history of these sightings. And because of that, it garners a lot of attention and interest that maybe it never would have if it was called something like the Point Pleasant bird, which originally it was called a bird because
Yeah.
it was thought to be more avian-like and have bird-like features. And so because of that, it was something that I think after this all happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, they started referring to it as a Mothman much later after the fact, and because of that, that's where the attention was brought. And so I think that you have these things happen, and I'm glad that you're bringing up some of the other cryptids. And as a good, part to also go into a segue here is that that you mentioned the orang pendek, and there are a lot of people who are maybe you've even heard of this. Maybe not a lot of people, but this is something that could be an interesting possibility out there in Sumatra, in the Indonesian islands. And something that I think is really important to consider is that while most people will never be able to go out there and to look into this, we do know that some people have, and some people who are actively involved in this work, who are continuing to be out and coming to events and sharing about it, is Adam Davis. And he's a world explorer, and he's also been to the Himalayas in search of the Yeti, as you mentioned earlier. He's also been to the Congo in Central Africa in search of Mokele and Mbembe. And so this is an individual who's done some incredible field work in places that most people will never go to. And I know that as much as I would love to be able to go to these places, hopefully maybe that'll work out. Maybe we can, coordinate something where we get together and we go on these expeditions. That would be great. But the thing is that the reality is most people won't ever be able to go to these places, but we do have those who have, who we can talk to, we can get their insight, their input, see what it was like for them. So, I'm glad to see that we're going to have Adam Davis come back for this year's Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas, later in October, because I think that's a great opportunity to talk to someone who has this experience, who's been out to Sumatra, or what was the ancient Sumatra, looking for this, mystery creature, maybe a primate or something, a biped that is claimed to exist, the orang pendek. And so he's been out there, and I think that's really incredible. I think that there could be something to it, and hopefully we can continue to find more by way of field research, field investigation, to maybe make further determinations. So it's really interesting to see. I'm glad we can have these people come out like this because they're few, far and few between. So, yeah.
Yes, like you bring up with the Texas Bigfoot Research Conference. I know also one big name that we're having this year is going to be Roland Coleman. He's been in this field since the 60s. He is a truly an encyclopedic uh, well of knowledge for this field. And like with these conferences, you have these people that have been in this field for decades, and it's such a wealth of knowledge, and you have the ability to truly talk to them in person and see what are their true feelings on these, what knowledge do they have, and it's just great. Like, for instance, my first time going to the Texas Bigfoot Research Conference was actually in 2017, and I was able to meet Lauren Coleman and of course King Gerhard, Blackbird, and this is the first time ever meeting these people, and it was awesome to just be able to like hear their perspectives, hear their research, because no one can say it. It's you can hear, of course, read about it in a book, but hearing about it from the person themselves, it's a totally different experience. And that's like one thing I love with these conferences is the ability to go out there and talk to these researchers. And I know you brought up the Paris, Tennessee conference. That's one that I was actually planning on going and attending, but just due to scheduling conflicts, I couldn't be able to. But I know it was put on by like King Gerhard and Josh Turner, the Paranormal Roundtable up in Austin, Texas, and those are two big names that are really big in this field and are great people to talk to. And I look at the Paris conference, and you have a lot of these people that might not have the name recognition of a Lauren Coleman or a Ken Gerhard, but might have as much knowledge or even different perspectives. And that's one reason I did want to go up there, but just wasn't able to because you have a mixing of knowledge and different perspectives. And you get to kind of see that you kind of have almost like I like to call it like a buffet of knowledge. You can have like, okay, if I want to hear this person speak, I can hear this person speak, and this person speak, and you can come out of it with your own perspective. You might not come out of it with your mind changed, but you might start thinking about certain perspectives or certain ideas because the sharing of knowledge is just so important. And I know, like with the Paris conference, I know I wasn't able to attend, but I was going to ask you, like, how did it go and how was it going up there, and like hearing the speakers and who were some of the speakers and things like that.
Right. I think it's really important to see that for a first time event, it was a huge turnout, a very successful event. And it seems to be that if they wanted to continue, it could happen again. And I don't know that it will, but at least we had this one so far. And my involvement with a lot of these events, it can vary. In my capacity through which I'm involved might be, depending on what I'm doing. I usually provide media coverage, and in this event and many others, like the Texas Bigfoot Conference as well, I help with a lot of the technical setup, the audio, visual, all of this stuff that we have to make sure that presentations run smoothly. And so I did that for the Tennessee conference here in Paris, Tennessee, as well as provided media coverage for it as well. So I recorded the presentations, and because I realized it's difficult to make it out to these events. I've been at it for a little while to know that not everyone can make everything, and most of the time most people don't make most of the things. And so it's something that I like to provide as a way of knowing that people who can make it can check it out after the fact and go, and even if they were there, they can rewatch it and go back and say, what were these people saying at this point in their lecture? Let me go back and double check, or just go see and say, hey, this is my buddy so and so, or hey, have you heard of this guy before? They talked about this at this event. So I think it's a good way for people to see and to document that these things are happening and these lectures are being given, eyewitness testimony at times. And so it was very much like a buffet of knowledge, like you say. And so it's something that everyone has a different part to bring and part to play when it comes to these types of events. The Paris, Tennessee conference, I think, went really well. And you had a number of people come forward, Jody Cook, Barton Nunnally. You had a few people that have been involved specifically in the dogman phenomena and the research, Nick Vellante, and a number of people who are very serious about trying to make sense of what otherwise most people would be immediately dismissive of and say it's impossible. There's no such thing, right? But these guys are, they're the real deal. They're trying to figure it out. They take this in a very serious way. But I think that it's fun to have the presence, because obviously people know. I mean, some people, they came specifically for this person or that person, mainly because they know that they have a following. They understand these types of people have a very niche focus, and they're looking into it. And there's also a big overlap with Bigfoot. There's not a lot of other cryptids. I think you could have a specific themed conference on and have it turn out as well as this Dogman conference. So I've been toying with the idea of something like a Chupacabra Con, here in Texas or something, because it's about one of the only other things that you could have like this, where
Yeah.
most of the other creatures, it's something you kind of have to include into a greater event. And like you're saying, we're very fortunate to have Lauren Coleman come out and to share about his wealth of knowledge and research into all of these different histories, folklore, sightings, in things that people have described for decades. So I'm really excited to see Lauren again. And I was at that 2017 conference with Lauren and all those guys as well. So we definitely were, in good company. And I think it's great to see that it's a long running event. It really brings together some of these areas. And so back then, and it hasn't happened so often recently, but each of the speakers would give a Bigfoot talk and then a different cryptid talk. And I thought that was really cool because it does incorporate more of a cryptozoology element. So it could be something we see happening more where it's not just Bigfoot, although that's the biggest one. You have these other cryptid type of events as well. And so sometimes you have these other types of research lumped together because it's the best way to bring people together. So while the big focus in this one of the Dogman conference was obviously Dogman, werewolf lore, and things like this, sometimes people kind of inadvertently brought in how Bigfoot plays a role. And to also bring into perspective with other things, Ken Gerhard gave a secondary lecture on the Thunderbird. Lyle Blackburn was there to talk about the Beast of Boggy Creek. And he's done a lot of other cryptid research, but it falls sort of outside of the guise of specifically Dogman. But they wanted it to be big Dogfoot, Dogman / cryptid conference. So they wanted to be more inclusive. I guess you could call it a Dogfoot if you wanted to, but that's the idea. Is that it's like you kind of have these crossovers between a lot of this.
I remember, I believe because I remember last year I was at a conference and Ken didn't attend, but I think in the 2017 conference, I think Ken Gerhard did a lecture on the proto-pygmy phenomenon. And of course, it's a Bigfoot conference. We have a phenomenon that's very similar ideas. Because with the proto-pygmies, of course, you have like the Littlefoots, you have the smaller unknown species like orang pendek, the agavui, the ahu, the ojul, not the wolf, that's a giant bat, totally different thing. But you have all these different creatures, and they might correlate. Like with Bigfoot, people might have heard of Bigfoot, maybe Yeti, but they might have not have heard of Yeren or Yowie or the Bukit Timor Monkey Man or the Muhalu or the Ukamar, and you have all these other phenomena, and you kind of find a correlation between there. And like when you have like a conference like with Dogman, you have, of course, Dogman, but then you can talk about maybe like other canine cryptids seen around the world, or like other cryptids that are very similar. And you find like the people that, of course, like I've seen, especially with Bigfoot, you have the Bigfoot researchers, and then they might just talk about Bigfoot. They might kind of point at other cryptids. They might bring up maybe Thunderbird every once in a while, or maybe just Dogman, something like that. And there's not many generalist cryptozoologists, like I like to say, because there's a couple big names you can, of course, say, like Adam Davies, Lowell Coleman, Ken Gerhard, but there's not a lot of people that truly look at everything. And that's like one thing that's kind of interesting with cryptozoology, how many different things you can look at. You can look at just Sasquatch, you can look at just lake monsters, you can look at just aerial phenomena, and have just being right enough and have a wealth of knowledge on just that. But with cryptozoology, it's all encompassing, and there's a little bit of everything. There's like, of course, the unknown hominoids phenomenon. Then you have like, I know even I talk about it myself, the prehistoric survivors. You have like unknown dinosaur sightings and pterosaurs, and then you have like ice age survivors, and you have the menagerie of lake monsters seen around the world. And it's just kind of funny how you find how encompassing cryptozoology is, and just how many unknown species are truly out there.
Yeah, I think that again, it kind of comes back to where we started off with. If you go online, you can research these things all day long. If you read books, you can find many different great works on the topic. But if you're looking to really branch out and set foot into some of these real places, I think it's a good opportunity if you could start with your local area, investigate what has been, documented historically or otherwise. Maybe you've heard by word of mouth some of these different sightings and encounters of any kind. And that's that's one of the things I really encourage that people do, is that, they want to say, like, how do I get started? How do I get into this? Well, I say, just look at what's in your area within a good 100-mile radius, if not anything else. See what you can drive to that's reasonable. Or if you're not able to find anything super close by, see what's around that you can take a road trip to go visit and see. If not anything else, it's a fun opportunity to go out to Fouke, Arkansas, go see that monster mart, go see that Boggy Creek sign with the real creek. That all of that, the whole cult classic of the Legend of Boggy Creek started 50 years ago. They just had the anniversary of the premiere the other day, and it's been 50 years now. So it's like you can go to these places and they're almost like tourist destinations, but really if you're bordering the line of general enthusiast to looking to really become a field researcher, the best way I think is to start looking into what's around in these regions, the concentrated area of activity and sightings that you can go out and explore. Go to parks, go to preserves, go to nature centers, go to places that are just already outdoors. Look into track and sign. You're more than likely never going to, not you, Ryan, or any particular person, I just say in general,
Yeah.
most people are never going to see a Bigfoot or a Thunderbird or a Chupacabra, but they will probably see track and sign of other very conventional, readily available animals in their immediate area. And if we overlook that, we're doing a disservice not only to science and to zoology, but our overall ability to be encompassing of the grounded research and approach that we need to, I think, understand this is important, that we acknowledge, I think, the reality that the world is full of animals, and I don't think we should place it in the sense of importance that Bigfoot should be the priority over mystery horse donkey, or something like
Yeah.
you said earlier. And just kind of to make light of that situation, they're all wonderful. And it would be amazing for us to find a near human. And maybe that could be a little bit up on the priority, because that's something that I think we all strive to understand is what would be out there like us that we can learn from, or maybe not so much like us too. And I think that if we can get out into these areas and explore and look at the different possible remains or signs of wildlife, it would give us the best indication of being able to see and be more aware and noticeable and open up our horizons mentally and physically, or however, to see that, wow, some of these things, it's not just that they're suddenly here because we're just now discovering them, but they've managed to be around maybe this whole time unnoticed. And that's exciting, because it's important to remember that we can make these discoveries, but we also don't want that to affect their livelihood and their populations in a way that might become a detriment to them. So as much as of an advocate, I guess I would say I am, to being able to do this field work, I think it's important to also be careful, and in the event, again, that we make discoveries, that we don't allow for that to become the downfall of saying, well, we discovered it and then now it's suddenly gone. But at the same time, I think that even if we don't find live specimens, we definitely are at a point in our advances that we could bring some back. And that's a very real thing happening. That was actually just announced with the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine, out in Australia. This is a small little dog-like creature that was seen and known to have existed, and there was actually footage of it as far back as the 1920s, and it's weird to have to say that now, to point that out, but it's something that we have to see is maybe still out there. Could be, some people claim it is, but either way, we're really bringing it back from extinction. We're going to see about, I think, just getting some of the genetics that are viable enough to bring in real populations back. And that's incredible to think. If we're doing that with the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine, who's to say that if we don't come across a carcass, a dead body of some strange hairy biped, that we don't gather some of those remains and say, let's bring it back, And sometimes it comes down to that Jurassic Park idea of like, just because science can doesn't really mean that we should, Yeah. So it's a moral and ethical dilemma sometimes.
Yeah. That's the thing with like cryptozoology, is that it's a big perspective opener, not just on like unknown phenomena, but also just the natural world. Like I kind of say that cryptozoology can kind of go hand in hand with conservation. Like if you're interested in the natural world, is discovery of Sasquatch or discovery of a dogman creature, that's all good and all, but as long as you find the conservation within biology and the natural world, because there's a lot of people that their love for camping or hiking or whatever comes about with Sasquatch research or researching any unknown species. And it kind of helps show that there, even with the species we know about, there are so many rare ones that we should keep them around. We need to work on conservation, and cryptozoology can help show that. Because what about well, if these unknown species do exist, how rare are they? How close are they to extinction? If they're so close that we don't even know about them, give it a couple years, you never know. There could be no sightings at all. Like there's some cryptids that a lot of researchers were talking about in the 1920s and 30s, and on then, but then the last sighting happened like 19 in the 70s or something like that. Like, for instance, I know Bernard Hooverman talks about the Brulu, a giant monitor lizard seen in the Himalayas, and then sightings stopped in maybe in like the 1970s. And okay, if that was a real species, the the stop of sightings might correlate to an extinction event. So that could be a whole species right there that we have no idea would even exist. And it's kind of the sad part of the natural world. And it is kind of fun to see that. And with it, of course, if people are going to be interested in this field, it is always great to look at like your local area. Like I, for instance, myself, I was a young kid watching things like Monster Quest, and I believe the episode that came on with the Chupacabra, they bring up the town Cuero, and I live in San Antonio. That's less than 50 miles south of me. So that really got my interest in this field. It's like, wait, if this stuff is happening this close to town, where I live, what else is going on? And then I heard about local Bigfoot sightings and local pterosaur sightings, and I've heard about Ken Gerhard that's in the area. So looking in your area, you never know what you could find, and you never know, you might discover something that no one else has. Like if you look at like the DFW area, you have a lot of phenomena occurring up there, even though it's a very urbanized area. You of course you have like the Lake Worth monster, but then you have like other Sasquatch sightings in the area. The Trinity River itself is full of unknown species sightings. You have I know there's been living pterosaur sightings, there's Bigfoot sightings, there are of course Thunderbird sightings. So looking into your local area is always a good first step into someone who is wanting to get into this field.
Yeah, and I'll just mention because you did bring up the Lake Worth monster. To me, I'm fascinated by the stories, and I think that it's probably to be understood that it may not be around 50 plus years later at this point, whatever it was, whether it was real or prank or hoax or whatever it was, but it's recognized by the Fort Worth Nature Center officially as being part of the history. They have a
Yeah.
plaque with their official logo that talks about a sign that says mythological wildlife, which I think is really awesome. So a good example also is to know that even though you can go out to these places, you may not be able to see anything, maybe nothing's still around, but it's like you're visiting these old stomping grounds, which something was once said to have existed within. And that's some pretty important work to do as well, is to understand, to appreciate the historical perspective and to understand that this is like the stomping grounds of something that may have existed at one point, and we can still go there and really pay homage to be able to go in and really see what it was like at a time where a pre-internet age and a place before cryptozoology as a whole was even really widely recognized. And so I think it's really cool. I live in the area and I just went there for the anniversary, but also because it's a bit of a tribute for me to, not just go to this cool place where I live, but also because, again, my buddy Jim Mars wrote those original articles in the Star Telegram well before he was a well-known author for the stuff that he really got into in his books and everything. But that he was someone who helped to share about something which became a huge phenomenon, which is not just isolated into the Texas area, but it's like people all over the world have heard about the Lake Worth monster, and now we kind of refer to it sometimes as the Goat Man, and it's really kind of interesting to see how again that cultural idea carries on as this strange legacy more than the actual history of what maybe had happened, unless that's maintained some kind of tradition. And I think it's really important to see that people are doing that work. I am looking into putting something together on that, because the main part of that story anyways I think is more influential than and then an investigation that can be done now to try to find some remains even
Yeah.
though we could do that anywhere. I think it's more about acknowledging the historical importance and significance of some of these things and the effect it has had on the culture, our outlook, all of that, and the role it plays and how we move on and we go from there. So to me, that's a really important one because of the influence it has had. I don't know that there's anything to be found there, but it's a fun place to go to, and knowing that there could have been something and that the place that had this happen encourages this work to be done further, I think is a big part of this involvement for anyone that can get out to these places as well.
Yeah. Like that's very similar to like down here in South Texas, down in Carrero. Of course, that was when like the Texas Blue Dog was sightings and all that back in the 2000s. If you drive down to Carrero nowadays, you'll find signs that say, well, Chupacabra sighting, Chupacabra crossing, and things like that. And it's kind of a what I like to call like a crypto tourism effect that people have that cultural idea of like look at Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Nowadays, they even have a Mothman museum and the Mothman festival, and they have this giant turnaround of people going there just because they had the Mothman sightings there. And also, of course, you have the trying to remember the name. I can't remember the name right now. But you have all these other cryptids seen around the road, like even just Bluff Creek in Northern California. You have this crypto tourism, this cultural idea of Sasquatch and of cryptids. And it's funny how you see these unknown species affect the culture itself and how the culture affects them. Like what you brought up earlier with Mothman. The first newspaper accounts called it Big Bird or just the Point Pleasant bird. But then if you look at modern day perspectives and modern day like interpretations, it's more insectoid. Like I remember a couple years back when my friends was playing a video game, I think it was like Fallout 76, and it has Mothman in it. They showed me a picture, and I'm like, that's not at all what people would describe. That's not what people talk about. And it's funny how just even the physical descriptions of these creatures could change. Like even I talked about with Sasquatch. Some of the early settlers, when they talk about Sasquatch, they talk about trolls with large horns, and I looked almost devilish in figure. But of course, that's not what we see nowadays. It's just how the perspective and culture has changed. Another one I bring up as well, with a good friend of mine, Ryan Paul Tremblay, that's been on the show. He talks about the Wendigo phenomenon. The modern day Wendigo perspective is not what the creature ever looked like. People nowadays describe it almost like a bipedal deer, while the Native American stories talk about more of a skinny humanoid creature. And it's funny how the cultural zeitgeist affects almost the creature itself. And it's just funny how much not a lot of people realize, but like culture, perspective, and also psychology affects cryptozoology itself.
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm particularly interested in. It's to me a study of cultural anthropology and how to think about these things in a way that influences or affects our outlook as a community of people involved with this subject. How we basically view different parts of these different types of phenomena, how we operate as a community. To me, it's really, like you said, a big part to play in what is encouraged in not just the tourism, but the historical ideology as well, and how we move forward in trying to ascertain more information or even data in the field. If we think we're going to go out and look for this giant bipedal deer or anthropomorphic moth or something, we're going to totally miss that. It's not the original description of these things at all. Not to say that something like that couldn't exist, and I don't know that it does, but it's something that really, I think, obfuscates in some ways the original source material of a lot of this stuff. So we have to keep that, I think, in perspective. And many, discerning researchers do. They've done the due diligence to make sense of those things. But really, new people coming in, which happens all the time, we have to remember, if we only isolate this to and this tight knit circle of people who are relegated as the real researchers or whatever, then we're kind of limiting the ability for it to be prodded by outside influence from people who are like curious about it, who want to come in and say, hey, I don't know what's going on here, I want to learn. What can I do to help out? It's something that we have to always consider, that people are going to jump in at any given time without any basis of knowledge about any of this stuff. So it's important that we do what we can to, I think, be including to people who are just finding out about any of this stuff for the first time, not just young people, but even generations of people who maybe have had a sighting at any point in their life that they never came forward. So I think it also operates as a supportive network of people to share their experiences and encounters, because that's so important. Because without it, we have very little to go off of. Otherwise, it's just, you kind of have to. It's very anecdotal. You have to take their word for it sometimes. And I think that because people come forward, it encourages others to come out of the woodwork and do the same thing, which is exciting. That they can feel comfortable enough to share something which otherwise maybe they don't have an explanation for, and that can be kind of frightening to really digest mentally and emotionally. Sometimes it's very traumatic for people because it's not always a fun, happy encounter. Sometimes it's a really unfortunate, terrifying thing for some people because they don't understand. It might set outside of the scope of what they consider to be like, their normal life or what's supposed to be out there. And then when they encounter something that's just outside of that, it's hard because everyone typically filters things out that don't fit in. And some people just totally phase out those types of things, and they're just like, nope, not gonna deal with that, which is kind of a big theme of that new movie Nope as well, which is a little bit different of a theme, but it kind of deals with that idea that culturally we'd like to filter things out that we just can't really handle because it's so far outside, it's so bizarre that it's difficult for us to really make sensible. And so I'm glad to see that we're doing the work that we can to provide a little bit of context, at least to show that there are people who make these claims, that people aren't alone in this. What it is, I don't know that there's anything. I mean, some people are very opinionated in this. Oh, well, you're dealing with this. You're dealing with this type of creature, this type of Bigfoot, or this type of whatever. And it's like, I don't know that anyone really has those types of definitive answers as it may come across or seem to be. Sounds very reassuring, but honestly, you have to be careful that people sometimes can be very misleading in this, because not everyone has answers. I don't think there are any experts. I think that people can be an expert in wildlife biology, tracking, track and sign, animal behavior and science. I think that we can have experts in grounded scientific work, but I don't think there are Bigfoot experts. I don't think there are Dogman experts. I don't think there are any experts in these things which we don't really know. I think that we have people who are experts at archiving historical records and documents about these things, but the phenomenon itself, it's hard to say. But some people might say otherwise, and so I just like to try to share that. I think it's important to stay humbled by the reality that there are no people out there who are degreed in Bigfootery or Bigfootology or cryptozoology, and even though you can get a fly by night printout saying you're a certified cryptozoologist, I mean, I think that it doesn't really have any accreditation with known universities or anything. And it might be a fun, cool study or something that you can do. Not to say you shouldn't do it or anyone shouldn't, but it's like, it's not a legitimate field of accredited study as far as science is concerned. And I think that that's why, to me, I have honed more in and refined my outlook to become more encompassing of the real grounded work that I think needs to be laid out for when we do make these, to me, inevitable, eventual detections out there in the natural world. So I'm excited about that, and I think that it's something I'd like to continue pursuing, because we have to be ready for when more of these, and I think we do, make discoveries every day. Might not be super fantastic like Bigfoot, but maybe it'll allow us to have the framework in place for when we do have something, a little bit more incredible or near human, as it were.
Yes, and that's really important to put in. It's almost like you're putting in the foundation for when these discoveries are hopefully made one day. Okay, what is the next step? They don't think about it. Okay, we already thought about it years ago. Okay, let's go to that next step. And it's very important to put that framework already in. And that's one thing also with the community itself with cryptozoology. We can be it can be very cannibalistic, and then it can also be very inclusive. And I really agree with the inclusiveness, because we all have different ideas. We're all individuals, and especially people that are just getting into the field, it can almost feel like it's 20,000 things coming at you all at once. You have all these different perspectives, all these ideas, but we have to kind of support the people in this community and the people coming in, because if we don't, we won't have that like next generation of researchers or people that are wanting to get into this field. Because they might just see, well, it's either all cracks or this person just yelled at me because I have a different perspective than them. And we need to be that inclusive, almost like there's a friend of mine at Tex Weston that works up in the DFW area. He's like, we have to be almost like a family and just like have everyone work together. And it's very similar to that because that's how cryptozoology is. It's we have to keep it a grounded science because if we really don't, it doesn't get that legitimacy that it should have behind it. And it's always good to see people like you out there doing this research because it's the people that keep it, that well-minded, keep the science within the science of unknown species that I'm hoping would help keep the future of the cryptozoology going and hopefully help make these discoveries one day.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, like I said, I'm just doing the minimal part that I can, to try to contribute to this meaningful work. And I think that it takes all kinds of multidisciplinary approaches to really uh, validating people's experiences into real science and real work that helps to shift the awareness of the public. And it's a community effort. And I think that it's important to see that, you're involved with this. You're continuing to help raise that awareness and to push the boundaries of what we can do to help encourage that and to bring people forward to share their experiences, their thoughts, whatever it is, research methodologies, to really provide some context again for people who may just be coming in, who may be at this for years, who can show that there's more to it than just very isolated ideas or accounts. It's not a vacuum of people. It's something that we have to be open to, as just any scientific discipline, be susceptible to change and adaptation when it comes to new information, new data, what we find in nature. It shouldn't be we make a model, and if nature shows us something different, we just keep working with this model, because we need to make sure that we're accommodating for new found information. I think it's really important, and also for new people who are coming in trying to digest all of it. It's like trying to jump into a series that has many seasons, and someone's like, I've never seen it before. I have to catch up, and like someone's already like, oh, I've seen the whole thing like a dozen times, and so for some people they're just coming in, there's like so much to take on, versus someone who jumped in right when they first started the first season or something, so it's an analogy I like to use because it's a really difficult thing to keep up with all of these different things. So some people are just interested in certain cryptids or certain areas or different types of phenomena, I think, can hone in on those research parameters to see what's the most viable resource to really start to look into. Because, again, YouTube obviously is a huge database full of stuff that's free. You might get some ads every once in a while, but no one's forcing you to have to pay anything other than if you want to, really. And there are some sites that I think people feel like, why are these people they're trying to sell books and sell merchandise and conferences? It's like no one's forcing anyone to buy anything. Most people are gladly doing this on their own volition, because they understand the meaningful work that goes into doing this, that they are supportive because they enjoy it. And yeah, there are people who might try to con people into some weird scheme, but really it's like, most people mean well, and they just want to be able to share something that they've been involved with in a way that most other people who are gladly willing to pay acknowledge. They don't feel like they're being duped, or they showed up to a conference and they're like, hey, what happened? How did I get here? How'd they get me out of all this money? It's like it doesn't work that way. And it's one of the things that you see happen in any hobby, any activity. It's a part of how our society operates. So I think that aside from people just getting upset that people are just trying to sell books and merchandise and conference stuff like this, I mean, it's a part of the community. It's part of any community that has involvement, that has participatory events and things. So I think it's a big part about how we operate as a community of people involved with this. I'm interested in that as much as the phenomenon itself, as for any of these types of phenomena. So to me, I really do what I can to look into them and to document, to provide media coverage of these types of things for the events, for documenting interview sessions with people involved with this. So I've been fortunate to connect with a lot of people who have had a part to play in the world of Bigfoot and how people see this phenomenon in different perspectives. And I think it's really great to be able to share that with people who otherwise maybe wouldn't think of how maybe it affects the outlook and where we can go from there with new information.
Yes, and it's just always good to have that sharing information. Have people like you that spread that information out there, because like when people maybe have an interest in like Bigfoot or something like that, they might have maybe a TV show they can watch or something like that, but they might not know the next step. Like, okay, where do I go to look up information? Where do I go to talk to people? And it's going to have people like you out there, even myself to an extent, that share the information and get the information out there. And I do know this is going about well past the 1.5 hour mark. So I was gonna say,
Well, I'm not sure if you're still there, Ryan. Hopefully you get looks like it's trying to load you in. Hopefully it didn't cut you off there.
let me see if I can get you back. Sorry, my computer just shut off.
Oh,
So
no worries. I didn't know if you got cut out there. I'm glad you're still here though.
yeah, I'm still here. Let's see. There you go. Get that. Sorry about that, because I know we are getting about the 1.5 hour mark. So I was gonna say, real quick, we'll probably be in it pretty soon. So if there's any like last minute things you want to say or get out there, like if people want to get in contact with you or
Yeah,
talk to
well,
you or anything like that, how can they get a hold of you?
sure. Well, I'm pretty easily searchable online on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, under my name, as you can see here. And again, people can go check out the Vortex on YouTube and see any of the content that I upload on there for free. And that's something that I like to be able to offer for people who can't make the conferences in person, who would like to go back and watch some archived footage from different events or interviews or even on location segments that's on YouTube as the Vortex. And you can always get in touch with me to continue the discussion, ask any questions, share any thoughts or experiences you have, and I'm glad to follow up. And Ryan, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been an honor, and I can't wait till we get together again here soon.
Of course. And if anyone out there is watching, like if you guys have the ability to go to it, go to the Jefferson Bigfoot Week conference. It's October 13th, 14th, I believe. What are the dates for?
Uh, 15th to 16th.
15th and 16th. So if anyone is in the area, it's out in Jefferson, Texas, East Texas. It's an event I would highly recommend. Like you can meet me and Alan Jones here. Like we got some good people coming. Greg Woolheater, he puts on the conference, and he's a great guy to talk to as well. So if you guys can, it's one event I would highly recommend. So real quick, it was great having you on, Daniel. Like I think the show went pretty well, and I want to say good night to all the viewers and to you, man. And it was great having you on.
Thanks, Ryan. I always appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, I'm looking forward to when we can get together next, and I will see you guys in the Vortex.
See you guys.